The unexpected war. Jason Hayes never imagined war would come to Earth like this. He was just a delivery guy from New Texas colony, living paycheck to paycheck. Every day was the same. Wake up, load cargo, fly to outposts, and return before curfew. Nothing exciting ever happened in his life. But that changed one cold morning. He was flying through the Cascari Belt, a quiet zone filled with old mining stations and broken satellites. It was a place no one visited anymore. Jason was only there because a last-minute order came in. Deliver food rations to an abandoned outpost. It didn't make sense, but the pay was double. As he approached the outpost, his ship's radar picked up something strange. A small fighter-class alien ship was drifting near the station, its lights flickering. The vessel was damaged, badly. Scorch marks covered its hull, and one wing was missing. Jason knew better than to get involved with alien conflicts. Humans were still new in the Galactic Alliance, and most alien species didn't trust them. Helping one could easily make enemies of others. But something about the way that ship floated, it looked helpless, abandoned. He hesitated, fingers hovering over the controls. Then he saw the distress signal blinking faintly on his screen. Life form inside. Oxygen low. Medical emergency. Jason's heart pounded. This wasn't just a broken ship. Someone inside was dying. Damn it, he muttered. He steered toward the alien vessel. The docking was rough, but he managed to seal the airlock. When he entered the alien ship, he was hit by the smell of burnt metal and ozone. The lights inside were flickering. Wires hung from the ceiling. Sparks danced across the floor. Then he found her. The lone alien woman lay slumped in the corner. She was tall, with smooth lavender skin, long silver hair, and strange, glowing markings across her face. Her armor was cracked. Blood, dark purple, leaked from a wound on her side. She opened her eyes slowly and whispered something Jason didn't understand. But he didn't need a translator to know she was scared and in pain. Without thinking, Jason lifted her into his arms and carried her back to his ship. "Hold on," he whispered. "I've got you." Back in his ship, he placed her on the medical bed and activated the auto-heal system. The machine hissed as it sealed her wounds and stabilized her breathing. Jason watched, unsure what he'd just gotten himself into. Then the alarms went off. 3 massive alien warships appeared on his radar, Sarnathi class, known for their brutality. They weren't here for trade or peace. They were hunting. Jason cursed under his breath. He'd seen images of these ships in news feeds. Sarnathi warriors never spared survivors. And now, they were locking onto his ship. He had to run. With one hand on the controls, and the other stabilizing the shields, Jason pushed his ship into emergency thrust. The engines roared. Lasers flew past him, some grazing his hull. The alien woman groaned behind him, still unconscious. "Don't die on me," Jason said. "You better be worth all this trouble." The chase lasted for minutes, but it felt like hours. Jason flew through asteroid fields, skimmed debris clouds, and finally jumped into hyperspace. When they came out, he was in a hidden sector near a dead moon. Safe for now. He leaned back in his chair, sweating and breathing hard. "What the hell just happened?" he whispered. The alien woman stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, and this time, she looked at him with focus. She said something again. This time, the ship's translator caught it. "You saved me." Jason blinked. "Yeah, I guess I did." She smiled faintly, her silver hair glowing softly under the lights. "You don't know what you've done," she whispered. "But one day, you will be rewarded." Jason didn't know what she meant. All he knew was that his quiet, boring life was gone, and he had just become part of something much bigger than himself. The secret hair. Jason woke up to a soft humming sound. His ship was still parked near the dead moon, hidden in the shadows. The alien woman was awake now. She sat quietly in the corner of the ship, her glowing eyes fixed on him. "You're finally awake," Jason said. She didn't respond at first. Instead, she stood up slowly and walked toward the control panel. Jason tensed, ready to grab his weapon, just in case, but she wasn't threatening him. She tapped her finger on the screen. A map appeared, a star system Jason had never seen before. At the center was a golden planet surrounded by defensive rings. "That is Sharia," she said, her voice smooth and calm. "My homeworld." Jason frowned. "Sharia? Never heard of it." "You wouldn't have. It is hidden, protected, but now it's under attack." Jason crossed his arms. "By the ships that chased us." She nodded. "The Xarnethi. They want our inheritance, our throne. But I escaped, with the key." Jason stared at her. "What key?" She reached into the broken armor near her waist and pulled out a tiny crystal. It shimmered with a pulsing light. Even without understanding it, Jason felt its power. "This crystal," she said, "is the last piece of my father's legacy. He was king of Sharia. Now, with him gone, I'm the only heir." Jason's mouth dropped. "Wait. You're royalty. I am Princess Kehlani of the House of Solaris. And you." She paused, staring into his eyes. "You saved my life. Which means, by our law, you are now bound to me." Jason blinked. "What does that even mean?" She stepped closer. "In our culture, a life debt is sacred. You didn't just save me, you became part of our fate." Jason shook his head. "Look, I just saw a distress signal. I didn't do it for reward or honor. I did it because I couldn't leave you to die. That's why it matters," she said softly. "Because you didn't ask for anything. And yet you risked everything." Jason sat down, overwhelmed. First alien warships, now alien royalty. He had no idea what was happening, but it felt like the universe had just dragged him into a game he didn't understand. Kehlani walked over to his ship's navigation panel. She placed the glowing crystal on it. Instantly, the map changed. A new route appeared, hidden, encrypted, ancient. "This path leads to a sanctuary," she said, "but we will not be alone." "Let me guess," Jason said. "More people trying to kill us." Kehlani smiled. "Some, yes. Others will kneel." Before Jason could ask what she meant, the sensors started blinking. 2 ships were approaching. Fast. Kehlani's calm vanished. "They found us." Jason jumped into the pilot's seat. "Hope you're good with a turret." She smirked. "I was trained in war before I learned to walk." The chase began. Jason spun the ship through the rocks near the moon, dodging fire. Kehlani fired back from the turret, sharp and controlled. The enemy ships were fast, but Jason was faster. With a risky spin and a blast from his rear cannons, one ship exploded behind them. The second one chased harder, locking missiles. "Hang on," Jason shouted, pulling the ship up and then dropping fast. They entered a narrow trench in the moon's surface. The enemy followed, but too closely. Jason triggered the mines he'd dropped earlier. Boom! The second ship vanished in flames. Silence returned. Kehlani returned to the cockpit, breathing hard. "You fly like a warrior," she said. Jason laughed, still shaking. "I just wanted to deliver groceries." She smiled faintly. "You are more than you think." Jason stared out the window, watching stars swirl around them. Somewhere out there was a hidden planet, a royal legacy, and a war he had no business being part of. But now he was, and somehow, he knew this was only the beginning. The brides of Sharia. Jason had seen a lot of strange things in his time as a cargo runner. Mutant beasts on asteroid farms, black market AI dealers, even floating ghost stations, but nothing prepared him for Sharia. The hidden planet rose before him like a dream. Its sky shimmered in layers of gold and blue. Towering crystal mountains pierced the clouds, and flying creatures with jeweled wings soared above glowing forests. It didn't look real. It looked like something from a forgotten legend. "Is this where you're from?" he asked. Kalani nodded. "This is home." As they descended, Jason noticed strange lights blinking near the surface. Not welcoming signals. Defense turrets. Someone didn't want them returning. "Why do I feel like your planet isn't happy to see us?" he muttered. Kalani's face was tense. "Because I was declared dead. And now someone else sits on my throne." Jason's heart sank. "So we're landing in enemy territory." "Not quite," she said. "There are still loyal houses. One of them is expecting us." The ship touched down in a quiet valley surrounded by silver trees. Waiting for them were two tall figures in elegant armor. Their eyes were bright, their posture regal, but it wasn't their weapons that made Jason nervous. It was how they looked at him. Like they already knew who he was. The taller one stepped forward and bowed to Kalani. "Welcome home, princess," she said. "Your people have not forgotten you." Kalani bowed slightly. "Thank you, General Varela. I bring news and a witness." The general turned to Jason. "So this is the human." Jason scratched his head. Hi." The general studied him carefully. "You're smaller than I expected." He smiled awkwardly. "I get that a lot." Kalani raised a hand. "He saved my life. And by our law, he is now my life-bonded guardian." That made Varela pause. Behind her, the other armored woman whispered something too quiet for Jason to hear. Then they both looked at him again, but this time, their expressions changed. Softened. Almost curious. "We will take you to the Temple of Accord," Varela said. "The council must see this." Jason walked beside Kalani through crystal halls and glowing corridors. Everything was beautiful, but strange. The way people bowed to her. The way they looked at him. Like he was more than a visitor, more than just lucky. As they entered the temple, a huge circle of elders stood waiting. In the center was a stone table glowing with old power. Kalani stepped forward and placed the crystal she carried on it. It lit up instantly. Gasps echoed through the room. "She holds the true seal," one elder said. "Then she is the rightful heir," said another. Jason was about to ask what that meant when Kalani turned toward him and took his hand. "By ancient law," she said aloud, "the one who saves the royal heir becomes more than a guardian. He becomes part of the royal line." Jason blinked. "Wait, what?" Before he could step back, another voice echoed from the shadows. "And as law says, 2 brides shall be chosen to honor that bond." A second woman stepped into the light. She had emerald skin, long black hair, and piercing violet eyes. Her expression was calm but unreadable. Kalani spoke softly. "This is Tyriel, my cousin. She too carries royal blood, and she has accepted the ancient rite." Jason's jaw dropped. I think I missed something important here." The council leader stepped forward. "You saved the bloodline, human. And now the bloodline honors you. By our tradition, you are to be wed to 2 of royal standing. Not for love, but for unity, for the balance of our people." Jason stumbled backward. "Married. To both of them." Kalani smiled gently. "It is not what you think. Not forced. You may still refuse." Jason looked from Kalani to Tyriel. They were both watching him, not with pressure, but with something else. Respect. Curiosity. Even hope. "I was just trying to help someone who needed it," he whispered. "And that," Kalani said, "makes you more worthy than any prince." Jason stood frozen as the light from the crystal continued to glow around them. The war wasn't over. Enemies were still hunting them. But now, Jason wasn't just involved. He was part of a royal prophecy. And suddenly, he wasn't just the guy who helped an alien once. He was about to become a legend. Assassins in the shadows. Jason couldn't sleep that night. He lay on a soft bed made of silken threads and glowing vines inside the royal guest quarters. Outside his window, The twin moons of Sharia lit up the forest below. It should have been peaceful, but something didn't feel right. Everything had happened too fast. One day he was just a broke cargo pilot. The next he was being promised riches, respect, and 2 royal brides. It felt like a dream. Or a trap. He sat up and looked around the room. It was silent. Too silent. Then he heard it. A soft click. Then another. Like metal tapping against stone. Jason stood and grabbed the only weapon he had, a ceremonial blade left beside his bed. He didn't know how to use it, but it was better than nothing. He moved slowly toward the doorway. The hallway was dark. Another sound. Closer this time. A whisper of movement behind the curtains. He spun fast, pulling the fabric aside, and froze. A shadowy figure stood there, cloaked in black armor, twin daggers drawn. Their eyes glowed red under the hood. Without a word, the assassin lunged at him. Jason ducked just in time. The blade slashed through the air where his head had been a second ago. He rolled and kicked at the attacker, knocking them back. But the assassin was fast, too fast. Jason raised the blade, hands shaking. "I don't want to fight you." The assassin said nothing and rushed him again. A loud crack echoed through the room. The attacker stopped, stiffened, and collapsed. Behind him stood Tyrael, his second bride-to-be, holding a stun rod. Her long black hair was messy, and she was breathing hard. "You move too loudly," she said, wiping blood from her lip. "I hurt him before he even touched the wall." Jason stared at the assassin's body. "He was trying to kill me." Tyrael nodded. "And not just you." She walked to the window and whistled sharply. 3 more shadow figures appeared in the trees, fleeing. "They came for the princess too," Tyrael said. This was a planned hit. Jason gritted his teeth. "Who sent them?" "Not the Tarnethi," she replied. "Someone from here. Someone who doesn't want Kalani on the throne. Or you by her side." Before Jason could respond, alarms rang across the temple. Guards rushed in, weapons drawn. Behind them came Kalani, wrapped in a silver robe, her expression sharp and angry. "Is he safe?" she asked Tyrael. "He is," she said. "But we were both targets tonight." Kalani's eyes darkened. "Then it's worse than I thought. The traitor is inside our court." One of the guards examined the assassin's body and pulled a small emblem from the armor. A sigil. A serpent with broken wings. Kalani's voice dropped. "House Varnak." Jason looked confused. "Friend or enemy?" "Enemy," Kalani said. "They served my uncle, the one who declared me dead, and claimed the throne for himself." Jason rubbed his face. "So now I'm not just in some royal family. I'm a target for execution." Kalani placed her hand on his. "I told you this wouldn't be easy, but I won't let them take you. Not after what you've done." Tyrael stepped beside them. "Neither will I." Jason looked at both women. So different, yet both standing with him when everything around them was falling apart. "I'm not a warrior," he said. "I'm just a guy who made a delivery." Kalani smiled softly. "You were. But not anymore." That night, Jason was moved to a secure chamber deep within the mountain, guarded by elite soldiers. But even there, sleep didn't come. Because now he knew the truth. This wasn't just a royal conflict. It was a full-blown power struggle. And someone wanted him dead. The price of loyalty. The hidden chamber was quiet, but Jason could feel the weight of eyes watching him. He sat on the edge of a stone bench, his fingers locked together, his thoughts spinning. All around him were guards in golden armor. They didn't speak, but their silence was loud. He was being protected, but it felt more like a cage. Kalani had promised him safety. Tyrael had promised to stand beside him. But tonight, Jason realized something important. Being bonded to royalty wasn't about comfort, it was about survival. Suddenly, the chamber door opened. Kalani entered, her face pale and tight. She walked straight to Jason. "They arrested 3 members of the council," she said. They were in contact with House Varnak. Jason looked at her. They tried to kill me. What happens to them now? They'll be judged, she said. But justice here is different. Bloodlines speak louder than truth. Jason stood up. So they'll walk free. Kaylani didn't answer right away. If I act against them now, half the planet could turn against me. I need more time. Jason clenched his fists. They tried to kill you. And me. How much time do you need? Kaylani looked at him, then reached into her robe and handed him something, a glowing disc. What's this? A record, she said. It holds the truth. Proof of who planned your assassination. And mine. Jason stared at it. Then show the council. Show the people. She stepped back. If I show it now, there will be war. Civil war. Jason looked into her eyes. And if you don't, then more assassins will come, she said. And next time, they won't fail. Jason said nothing. His mind was heavy. Everything in him said to act, to fight, to expose the truth. But now he realized something deeper. This wasn't just about good and evil. It was about balance, timing, and trust. Tyrael entered the room next. She looked tired, angry. I heard what happened, she said to Kaylani. You're protecting them. I'm protecting the people, Kaylani replied. Tyrael scoffed. You think House Varnak will stop? They won't rest until you're dead, and the throne is theirs. Kaylani's voice rose. And if I attack them now, we lose support. We need the outer colonies. Their loyalty is tied to Varnak's alliances. This is bigger than us. Jason stepped between them. Enough, he said. Fighting each other won't help. The room went still. Tyrael looked at him. Then what do you suggest, human? Jason took a breath. You both have power, influence, but I don't. No one expects anything from me, which means I can do what you can't. Kaylani tilted her head. What are you saying? I'll deliver the disc, he said. Not to the council, to the people. Tyrael frowned. That's dangerous. Jason nodded. Yeah, but it's the only way. Kaylani hesitated. They'll try to stop you, maybe even kill you. Jason smiled faintly. Wouldn't be the first time. Kaylani placed her hand on his. You're not just part of this story anymore, Jason. You're part of our future. If you do this, you may never be able to return to your old life. He looked at her, then Tyrael, then down at the disc in his hand. My old life was empty, he said. This one has meaning. Kaylani's eyes glistened. Tyrael nodded, her respect now clear. Jason left that chamber not as a delivery pilot, not as a stranger, but as a symbol. And somewhere in the shadows, someone else was watching. A figure in dark robes stood on a cliff overlooking the temple, holding a long spear. Behind her, a small army waited in silence. The human moves, she whispered. Let him. We'll strike when the people believe in him most. Let him rise, and then we'll break him. Voices of the people. Jason stood in front of the old signal tower on the cliffs of Sharia. Wind tore through his clothes, and the sky above rumbled with storm clouds. The tower hadn't been used in years. It was banned by the current rulers because it broadcasted on open channels, uncensored. That's exactly why Jason was here. He held the glowing disc Kaylani gave him, his thumb hovering over the activation switch. This is crazy, he muttered to himself. Behind him, Tyrael adjusted her cloak and watched the horizon. You still have time to change your mind. Jason glanced at her. Would it matter? She smiled faintly. Not to me, but it would mean you live a little longer. He turned back toward the rusted control panel and placed the disc inside. The tower lit up, humming with power. Screens flickered, then went dark. One by one, systems came back to life. Jason took a breath. Here goes nothing. He tapped the comm system and leaned in. People across Sharia were going about their day, working in markets, flying between crystal towers, walking through sacred gardens, when suddenly their personal comm devices lit up. A human face appeared. "My name is Jason Hayes," the voice said. "I'm not from your world. I'm not royal. I'm not powerful. But I carry a message that you need to hear." The image cut to the recording from the disk. Proof of betrayal, intercepted communications, maps of planned attacks, names, faces, secret meetings, everything House Varnak had tried to hide. Gasps filled homes, shops, halls. Some screamed. Some fell to their knees. And in the royal palace, Kaylani watched the broadcast silently. "He did it," she whispered. Back at the tower, Jason's voice continued. "You don't know me. I was just a pilot who helped someone in trouble. I didn't ask for this. I didn't want glory or power. But now I see, silence helps the wrong people win." He looked into the camera, his eyes tired but clear. "If you believe in truth, if you believe your lives matter, then don't stay quiet. Stand. Speak. Choose who leads you. Don't let fear decide your future." He ended the broadcast. The tower went silent again. Tyrael stepped beside him. "You just lit a fire." Jason didn't answer. He was staring at the blinking red dot on the tower's radar. "Incoming ships, many." "They're coming," he said. Tyrael looked at the sky. "Then we hold the hill." They prepared fast. The tower's defenses were ancient, but still functional. Jason locked down the gate. Tyrael activated energy shields. Soon, shadows filled the sky, dozens of black-armored soldiers dropping from carriers. The enemy wasn't waiting anymore. The first wave hit hard. Blasters, drones, and smoke grenades. Jason ducked behind a wall, firing the best he could. Tyrael moved like lightning, her twin blades slicing through the attackers with deadly grace. But there were too many. "Fall back," Tyrael shouted. They ran into the tower's core chamber, locking the heavy doors behind them. "We're surrounded," Jason said, breathing hard. Tyrael looked at him. "This was never about winning here. You sent the message. That was the mission." Jason nodded. Still, not a fan of dying. Then something strange happened. The sound of battle outside faded. A soft hum filled the air. They heard shouting, panic, but not from the enemy. Jason peeked out through a broken panel, and his eyes widened. Civilians, hundreds of them. Farmers, traders, engineers, old people, teenagers, all of them flooding the cliffs with tools, makeshift weapons, and banners with Kaylani's sigil. The people had come. Tyrael laughed. "You really did light a fire." The enemy soldiers, caught off guard, started pulling back. Their ships lifted into the air, retreating toward the dark mountains. Jason stepped out of the tower, stunned. People were cheering. Some of them ran to hug him. "You spoke for us," one old woman said. "No one ever does." "You told the truth," a young man added. "That's all we ever wanted." Jason looked out over the crowd. For the first time, he wasn't just an outsider. He was one of them. And far away, in the shadowed throne hall of House Varnak, a man in royal robes watched the broadcast again in silence. Then he turned to his guards. "Kill the human," he said. "Kill him before they call him king." The human king. The palace gates were wide open. Jason stood at the foot of the grand stairs, his clothes torn, his face marked with dust and blood. But he stood tall, because behind him were thousands. Citizens, warriors, nobles, farmers, even children. Sharia's people had come. Not with weapons of war, but with the strength of truth. And in the center of the palace courtyard stood Lord Varnak. Cloaked in black and gold, his face twisted with rage. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His soldiers formed a line in front of him, weapons raised. Jason stepped forward. Kaylani and Tyrael stood at his sides, one in silver, one in emerald. Varnak finally spoke. "You think you've won because you stirred the weak. Because you put on a show. Jason raised his voice, clear and calm. No, I don't think I won anything. I think they did. He pointed back at the crowd. They chose truth. You ruled with fear. You silenced anyone who questioned you. But now, they see you. Varnak sneered. They see a foreigner. A human who doesn't belong. Jason looked around at the crowd, then back at Varnak. I didn't come here to belong, he said. I came here because I couldn't watch someone die. That's all it took, and that's all it should ever take. Varnak shouted, kill him. But no one moved. His soldiers looked at each other. Then one by one, they dropped their weapons. Varnak's eyes widened. No, you obey me. One soldier turned and bowed to Jason instead. Then another. And another. Varnak stepped back. You're not royal. You're nothing. Kayleni stepped forward. Her voice rang like a bell. He is more royal than you ever were. He chose courage. He chose sacrifice. He gave power to the people. Tyriel added, and by the law of our ancestors, the one who unites us, leads us. Jason turned to Kayleni and whispered, this wasn't supposed to happen. She smiled. But it did. Tyriel stepped beside him. You saved one of us. Now you've saved all of us. Drums began to beat, slow and deep. The people began to chant, not in English, but in the language of Sharia, words Jason couldn't understand, but he could feel them. They were calling him something sacred. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking. I'm not a king, he whispered. Kayleni took his hand. Maybe not yet. A royal guard approached with a robe of deep blue and silver. Another held a circlet, simple, not gold, but forged from star steel. A crown of peace, not power. Jason stood still as they placed it on his head. The crowd erupted, not with noise, but with light. Crystals all around the palace lit up in perfect sync. It wasn't planned. It was Sharia itself, responding, accepting. Jason turned and looked at Kayleni, then at Tyriel. Both smiled, tears in their eyes. You're not just our king, Kayleni said softly. You're our future. He pulled them both close, not because of a title, but because they had fought beside him, blood beside him, believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. And above them, in the sky, the twin moons aligned. An old symbol of prophecy. A new age had begun, not ruled by blood, but by choice, by heart, by him.